go a little bit out of format, and we're going to talk to Carl Szabo, and he is Vice President and General Counsel of NetChoice, where he analyzes, advocates, and testifies on tech-related legislative and regulatory initiatives relevant to online companies. Carl is also an adjunct professor of Internet Law at George Mason University in the Antonin Scalia Law School. Tripped the detector when we said the name of the late justice. Carl, welcome to the microphones and telephones of America Armed and Free.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I'm glad you could be found. And on foundation, what possible stimulus causes someone to go to law school, become a certified information professional in communications law, and do so magna cum laude? That is some level of geekdom.
Yes, the geekdom started early with me. It was alive and well. But ultimately, everything that I do is kind of rooted in a foundation of economics, law, and originalism. And that's kind of been my guiding light throughout my career. And being able to, as you mentioned, teach at the Antonin Scalia Law School, and much like your program, much of what I do is centered and grounded in creating opportunities, economic and opportunities for speech, that are centered in the breaking down of barriers erected by government that impede the ability of Americans and businesses to grow, move, and operate how they want to.
Can we clone you?
The sheep, definitely. Humans are in the works.
That's what the law school professoriate is all about, right? Is cloning you, at least legally speaking. All right, on to the issue. You formerly worked at the Federal Trade Commission. What did your work at the FTC teach you about government regulation of tech?
I was really lucky. So I worked for a former commissioner, this was back in 2000, by the name of Orson Swindle. Now,
that's a perfect name for a government worker, by the way.
Oh, but he was anything but.
Right.
He was a true American hero. He was actually shot down in Vietnam and was in the tiger cages with John McCain. Huh. That's how the two of them got to know each other. And so Orson, Commissioner Swindle, believed, as I do, in creating an opportunity for businesses to operate with limited government intervention. Now, what I mainly focused on when I was there is something that was very much ahead of its time, because this was 99, 2000, and it was internet security. Because most people were just kind of getting on the internet at the time. We'd just gone through the dot-com bubble bursting, and not many people thought about security, especially when it comes to being online. And one of the things that the Federal Trade Commission is uniquely positioned to do, and something that, much to my dismay, they've gotten away from, is educating consumers, educating people, helping them better understand the threats out there and how to navigate them. Now, this was quite a while ago, and since then, I've worked in other parts of the federal government, and my general takeaway is not a strictly libertarian approach of no government whatsoever, but I do believe that we need to increase government accountability across the board and recognize that our founders created different branches of government. You have, of course, the legislative, the judicial, and the executive. And one of the challenges we see not only here in D.C., but across the country in state legislatures, is lawmakers willing to just cede over their power, hand over their authority to the executive branch. In this case, it would be the Biden administration, to be the ones to make rules, to make decisions, to write the laws as the Biden administration wants to see it, not as Congress would write it.
Right.
And we've seen a real kind of explosion of these governmental overreaches. Now,
ergo the administrative state.
Absolutely. And so if you look at the Supreme Court, this past term and this upcoming term, there were two decisions of real important note.
Yeah, the West Virginia one is one of them.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep, that's exactly it. The West Virginia one, which, as your listeners probably know, is centered on the notion of if Congress didn't say you can do it, government, you can't just go and do it. Mm-hmm. The second one is coming up before the court this session, and it's against the EPA. And it's a question of how much power and land can the EPA grab without exceeding its governmental authority. So what you're seeing, fortunately, from the court is a recognition that as you give away power from Congress to the administrative state, that is an actual march towards fascism, and the correct use of the term fascism, because those are decisions not made by our elected congressional or representatives, but by somebody who just happens to sit in an office.
Yep, and it's also a stake through the heart of Wilsonian ideological devolution of the country.
Yeah, and that's what I wake up every morning to do, and what gets me out of bed is to look for new threats and new opportunities to begin breaking down those barriers to free speech and to free enterprise.
Interesting. Does the legal... No, I don't have time for... I want to get into the meat of the topic. What is wrong with Senate Bill 2992, Senator Klobuchar's antitrust bill?
Yeah, so let's look at the concept of antitrust. So there was a poll that Senator Amy Klobuchar, she's Democrat from Minnesota. She's been in office 20-plus years, and she is very much looking to become president. So she's thinking these antitrust bills, S-2992 and S-2710, are going to be the launching pad for her presidential campaign. Believe it or not, she did run in the last election. She went out pretty much as quickly as Kamala Harris. So Senator Amy Klobuchar is advancing this narrative that we need to break up America's businesses and America's most successful businesses. And she is often found citing statistics saying Americans want to break up big tech. And if you pull back the curtain a little bit, you realize that the polling question is, do you think big tech is too big? Kind of a leading question. Believe it or not, most Americans don't care about quote-unquote big tech or antitrust as their number one issue. What are they worried about? They're worried about the economy, education, crime, and the border. Not surprisingly, as everyone knows. But Senator Klobuchar didn't get the message. She wants to talk about antitrust. So these bills, what are they designed to do? They are designed to make it harder for American businesses, America's leading businesses, to grow and provide products as cheaply and as efficiently as possible. So for the past 40 to 50 years, our antitrust law has been centered on something called the Consumer Welfare Standard. Long and short, what that means is businesses, if they are competing efficiently, will produce the lowest prices and the most well created products. And today, right now, you're seeing lower costs compared to what we had 20 years ago and high quality. So Senator Klobuchar wants to kind of flip it on its head. Instead of it being this objective standard of are consumers better off or not, she wants to make it all about, does somebody in the Biden administration think your business is too successful? If yes, she will then allow them to impede their ability to grow and or just break them up completely. And what this would mean is, under the law itself, Amazon, for example, would not be able to offer Amazon Prime shipping with a guaranteed 2-day delivery. They wouldn't be able to feature that when you go shopping on there. Apple would not be able to remove apps that are clear and present threats to security and privacy, which they do all the time. In fact, Facebook just had to deal with a bunch of deceptive ads causing problems. So that's one of the other threats to this legislation. Another is it would just hand over more power to the administrative state to decide what is or is not good for the American people when it comes to a handful of American businesses. And it's yet another example of how this Congress, this administration needs to kind of be pulled back to reality. We want American businesses to be the world leaders.
What reality?
We want American businesses.
Reality, what's that?
Well, that's part of the challenge is a lot of our leaders, for example, the Federal Trade Commission, which is one of these three-letter bureaucratic agencies, all three Democratic commissioners who lead this agency, and this is an agency responsible for regulating every business, whether it's a corner store or it's Apple or Microsoft. And the three Democratic commissioners, not a single one of them has a background in economics, something you would think you'd want in an economics-based administrative regime. They all have worked exclusively in the I-95 corridor, which is like the East Coast elite corridor, and they don't really have connections with what average Americans actually want. At the end of the day, what do we want? We want the lowest prices, the best goods, and the most choice.
Excuse me, Carl, we're up on a break. I don't think they have much connection with reality, but stand by. We're up on our first break. We'll be right back after this. Carl Szabo of NetChoice, and it's fascinating. There's way more to this than we've gotten to, so we'll be back in a little bit.
This is Herman Cain, and if it has a muzzle, a nozzle, or a blade, you'll find your topic on America Armed and Free. Sundays, right after Liberty Watch.
Swap shop trains are coming, rolling down that free market track. Sunday mornings, you can buy, sell, or trade anything lawful and moral on the Swap Shop. Let's listen. Dawn Wells, is there anything you missed on the island?
Oh, well, actually, what I really missed, there we were with nothing to do. What I missed most was the Swap Shop. I mean, what fun we'd have had. I don't know how we'd have gotten a hold of you, but we'd have tried.
Swap Shop, Sundays 10 to 11 a.m., right before Liberty Watch.
I'm Oliver North, and like you, I'm listening on America Armed and Free with Charles Heller. Civilian disarmament is an essential precedent for every dictator who engages in mass murder.
This is Dana Lash. You're listening to America Armed and Free with Charles Heller on AM 1030 KVOI, The Voice.
And welcome back to America Armed and Free. We have the joy and pleasure of having with us Carl Szabo of NetChoice. And we also have caller Mike. Mike, you're first after the break here. What do you want to ask Carl Szabo?
Well, first of all, I wanted to ask if he agrees that the breakup of the Baby Bells and the stuff that was in the 70s.
Ask him. He's on the line. Don't in the third person.
Yes, thank you. Sir, can you give me your input on the breakup of the, as I said, the Baby Bell system?
By Judge Green. By Judge Green.
Right. And my question to you is, did you think it was a bad thing when these conglomerates get so huge that they control marketplace?
Okay, that's a good question. Hang on for a follow-up. Carl?
Yeah, and that's something that often comes up when we talk about antitrust is people talk about the Baby Bell breakup. But the problem with that analogy is that the Bell system, and keep in mind, this is the telephone system from like the 1950s through like the 1970s, 1980s. That was essentially a government-created monopoly, the way that they were structured. So the government has actually put its finger big time into the marketplace to create this system. They wanted one singular entity for purposes of telecommunication systems. And that created significant distortions in the marketplace. And what you saw there was essentially the application of existing antitrust law. And that's something I strongly support. Under antitrust law today, you need only show three things. One, what's called market power. Two, abuse of market power. And three, consumer harm. So in the case of the Baby Bells, did they have market power? Yeah, they owned 100% of the market. Did they abuse it? Absolutely. They prevented new entrants from coming in or even hooking onto their phone lines. And then finally, did that harm consumers? Absolutely, because there weren't competitors. But when it comes to the tech industry, competition is fierce. One of the statistics is Walmart is still double the size of Amazon, which most people in the regular part of America realize, but the people on the coast don't. Another would be people complain about having only two choices when it comes to smartphones, Google and Apple.
That's not true either.
That's still robust. And that in and of itself is robust competition, though. That's like saying I can only choose between Coke and Pepsi. That's two fierce competitors. So every part of the tech ecosystem is not only fiercely competitive, but the barriers for entry are incredibly low. And a good example of that would be your previous guest mentioned Substack, which is incredibly popular right now. Rumble just went public the other week. You have Getter, Parler, MeWe, Snapchat, Twitter, and, as frustrating as TikTok is for some people because of its connection to China, it is now the most visited site on the planet, and Meta, or Facebook, is having significant financial problems. And that's the thing about the tech industry, where if there are abuses in the marketplace under existing antitrust law, we can address it. And the breakup of the baby bells, while important, is a different scenario completely.
So you made a reference to my previous guest. So you were listening to the previous hour?
Oh, yes.
God save me from ever having to legally oppose you for a fellow that does that kind of research. All right, Mike, follow-up question. You there? No, you're not. I had you on hold. All righty. And so you made an interesting point, Carl, about the government establishing the bell system in effect because they wanted there to be unity over the communication system starting in the 1950s when they did that. But how has technology changed in such a way, and you've just been talking about it to some extent, but how has technology changed the way we should approach that type of regulation?
The thing is, I actually prefer little to no government regulation. I have two lawsuits that we currently have against Florida and Texas over what's called compelled government speech. They're trying to force online websites to host content that they don't want to host. Likewise, California just passed some really bad laws, which there are conversations about lawsuits against those, which would force websites to remove content that they don't want to remove. And at the last, finally, we've got the Biden administration with its disinformation governance board. At the end of the day, we want government as far away from the levers of speech as possible, because even if it's our guy in office, history has taught us that 4 to 6 years it won't be. And when the other person takes over, you certainly don't want them at the helm deciding what is or is not appropriate speech. Because as frustrated as I sometimes get at the tech industry, and keep in mind, these are NetChoice members as well, and members of my company, and they frustrate me all the time with their content moderation decisions, I can quit them anytime I want. The one thing I can't quit is the United States of America. And that's the significant difference right there. So at the end of the day, I'd much rather let the free market be my guide than whomever helms the White House.
Well, government has what I refer to as the fecal touch. That which it touches usually turns to crap. And the farther, like you say, keep it as far away from the levers of power as possible. But, government being attracted to regulation is kind of like flies to the garbage dump. I mean, you can't, it's almost impossible to keep it away. And our Constitution was written to protect us against democracy, for instance. And you get so many people in political office, I don't care on the left or the right, elephant in the room or donkey in the room, don't care who they are, who keep talking about democracy. It's like, I scream at the radio speakers every time I hear that. It's a constitutional republic. A democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on the lunch menu. And I realize it's an overbroad statement. There are democratic components to our system of government. But the whole idea is, how in the world can you have an enforcement mechanism that will, sort of put a ligature around the neck of government and tighten until the patient becomes slightly cyanotic? How do you do that?
You can't.
Well, there's a succinct answer.
I mean, so
Heck with you, Carl.
If you hand over, if you hand over the power, it's really hard to get it back. And I mean, that's why we have 2 lawsuits that are literally on their way to the Supreme Court addressing this issue, where we don't want the government having say over speech online. I don't care who helms the office. And that's where we need the people on the ground, our elected leaders, and the judicial branch to begin returning us to our constitutional values. And those are centered on, well, the First Amendment, right, which is the government essentially cannot put its finger on what speech is or is not. The Second Amendment, as your show and audience well know. I mean, the one thing they seem to be really good at, the government, is the Third Amendment, which is quartering of troops, which isn't a threat just yet. But nonetheless, we need our courts and our government to return to what it is about, which is limited government, and the power in the United States of America does not come from the government. The power comes from the people, and that is power we give to the government. And at this point, we need to stop giving the government more power, because it will take all the power it can.
You know, I wonder if we can do anything over the next few years in cases about destroying Chevron deference, which is a term where deference is given to the government in assuming that a law is constitutional. Is short of trying to amend the Constitution, which gets resistance from the right as much as the left, is there a way of getting things like presumption of reasonableness destroyed in government actions?
So there are several different ways we can approach this. The simplest would be literally just Congress writing a law. Congress today could step out and write a law saying, courts shall assume that an action by the executive branch is unconstitutional until the government proves that it is. And as you mentioned with Chevron deference, the easiest way I describe it is essentially the government is always right, and you, as the individual, have to prove them wrong, which is an absurd standard.
Right.
So that's one way, is Congress can write a law to do it.
Government uber alles.
Yes, exactly. So the government, so the courts can do it. And I think you saw this with the West Virginia.
West Virginia VA.
Yeah, that we referenced earlier. You're going to see it similarly in the upcoming EPA decision that's before the trial that's before the court this term. And I think those are 2 really good opportunities to begin reminding the executive branch that they work at the will of Congress and at the will of the American people, not the other way around.
Yeah, we need a nonprofit, the Oive Institute. All right, we're at the end of the half hour that you've agreed to. If you can stay on, great, Carl. I'd love to have you longer. If you have to go, I completely understand, and I got some topics to cover. So your choice at this point.
I have to run to a friend's 50th, but thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. You do really great work, and the great Americans that you have just coming on your show is really inspiring.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Carl. Coming from you, when the law prophet Georgetown says that, that's something. Hey, give your website or any website you want this audience to know. How can they read more of the work at NetChoice? What is it?
Easiest way to describe NetChoice, we're a right-of-center tech trade association that promotes free expression and free enterprise. You can find out more about us and what we do at netchoice.org. That's netchoice.org.
All right. And if I have a question that relates to technology, may I feel free to reach out to you and get your professional opinion on it?
Absolutely.
All right, Carl. I really appreciate what I really appreciate is your intentionality, is the way you go after what you do, sort of a ground-up passion, and also you do your research. God protect me if I ever have a legal disagreement with you. All right, you have a great day.
Have a great one. Thank you very much.
Yep.